this aspect that is baked in to every aspect of nature. It's called New Beginnings. I remember as a child, we would build cities in the sandbox. I was on military bases, and there were a lot of kids around. And all of a sudden, someone said, let's start new. And we'd take out all the tunnels and make everything equal and then start again. I think about after the Second World War, Japan was flat. And wow, talk about a new beginning. I mean, it was Japan and Germany who became second and third best economic forces very quickly after the war. They became new. And as 40 years as a pastor, all the divorces and the deaths and the transitions, I've watched so many people make their lives new. Even a few with disabilities. And as a vet, when I get out of the service, man, I didn't know what I was going to do. My dad said, you're going up there to the VA and let them test you. And so I did, and I found out I just wasn't stupid. A new beginning happened that day. You see, this is part of it. Think about the tulip right now. The tulip is a bulb sitting in the ground that is frozen. Think about seeds. Think about Persephone, the queen of the underworld, of agriculture and vegetation. The whole concept of going underground to create new beginnings. And we've talked about there in chaos are new orders of order that are trying to emerge. Making new beginnings. It's what happens this time of year. You get a new job. You find a new relationship. You move somewhere new. A new phase of your life begins. You get married. You get divorced. You find out you can't walk a quarter mile anymore. And you have to make your life new. See, here at the deep end, we've been trying to at least recognize that the previous ways of thinking about things, are the maps that we have been handed from one generation to the next, no longer fit the terrain we're in. We need new ways of thinking and talking about being and life and consciousness and morality and governance and civilization. And many of these are ancient ways with tons of updates, is what we're finding out. The language is being updated, but the truth of it, humans have found and discovered many times throughout history. What we can say is that a time of new beginnings, and I hope that we use the year as a metaphor to hang our lives on, to make something new. Because when you intentionally start seeing that you're making something new, you start seeing all these opportunities and possibilities. I'm a Moody Blues freak. I like the Beatles a lot, but when it comes to my inner programming, the Beatles probably have my outer programming, but the Moody Blues have my inner programming. And something that I've done in the last few months is listen to tons of interviews of the Moody Blues, because I've never really knew about who they were. And Justin Hayward over and over talks about his love of an uncertain future. And that there's this point of unfolding when you see the future as pregnant with something new, with uncertainty, and it's there for you to mold, if you will. And I love this place because it's where songs come from. It's where creativity is most alive. So this is a great time of year to think about your new beginnings, how you make new in your life, and how to make it more intentional. We are all redoing ourselves, remaking ourselves, our myths, our meanings, our understandings, our contexts. This is something that's ongoing. And as I said, it's baked into everything from the very beginning, this place where things become new. We've talked about the three essential processes of semi-permeability, differentiation, and complexification. This is a process that's so part of us, and as we become more aware and conscious, then we need to participate more in the process itself. And that's what I'm suggesting. That's what the deep end is suggesting. I think that's what the language we're reaching for at the deep end is, ways to participate more fully and tack the sails of human nature in such a way that we avoid the deeper conflicts that can plague us and harm us in deep ways and keep us from moving forward and growing towards health and wholeness. So I just laid out a whole bunch, my cohorts, Bob and Marianne. I hope you all had a great Christmas, Hanukkah, whatever the holiday brought. And I hope in the new year we all find some new beginnings, some new ways of thinking about ourselves in the world. Marianne, I'll start with you. New beginnings.
Well, one thing that you mentioned that really resonates with me is that we're continually experiencing new beginnings. And I think at this time of the year, as the calendar changes and we collectively recognize that there's new opportunities, there's new ways of thinking, there's new ways of being in the world, that as we can go into a new year with hope, but there's another piece to this, that we're leaving something behind as we go into something new. And I think that this time of year really solidifies that in us. But honestly, every single day is the beginning of a new year, right? And so, but as we can collectively experience this, I think that's the beauty of what's happening right now and what happens at this time of the year, where people start to recognize that, hey, wait, I have an opportunity here to do something different, to do something new.
Yeah.
And so Happy New Year, everyone.
Amen.
Yeah.
And you know, the whole concept of letting go and the grief piece of that, you know, I experience it real loud with my grandson because he's growing so much and is less likely to get in my lap and, you know, those kinds of things. So, new beginnings. Bob, how are you? And new beginnings, man, what can I say?
I'm doing well, thank you, and looking forward to the new year. The whole idea of new beginnings makes me think in terms of the cycles of life. And what you just said, Marianne, you know, every day is the beginning of a new cycle. And everything about humanity, about our planet, it's all revolving in terms of cycles. We have the yearly cycle, we have the monthly cycles, we have the daily cycles. We have the cycles of tasks that we undertake. You start a task, you work on a task, you finish the task, you hand it over to whoever you're doing it for. Even if it's just yourself, then you can sit back and smile at yourself and say, I completed this task. But that in itself is a cycle. And that got me to thinking, well, you know, people have always tried to say, well, what is God like? What is this? Can we see God? You know, what is it all about? And the metaphor of Jacob actually encountering God and wrestling with God, the way he described it was wheels within wheels. And what a perfect description of cycles, the cycles that are within cycles, and we're all geared to that. And I think it's important that as we try to become more conscious, we realize that there's always the opportunity for a new beginning. You know, we can build on what we've done before, but we don't have to dwell and we don't have to stay in the same pattern that we've been. We have the opportunity to change because that's part of what we are as human beings.
And, you know, you put your finger on a big piece. We can't really change unless we're honest about the previous pattern. And so that becomes integral. My kids just gave me the book, Robert E. Lee, which is the most definitive. And it's, you know, people say you should only read what you want. And I go, yeah, I don't want to read this, but I've got to read it for the sake of my own soul and doing some cleansing. You know, the whole concept to me of participating in the flow that's already happening. And Bob, you laid it out with the different cycles. It's amazing. As you were talking, I was thinking the Moody Blues, turning, spinning, Catherine wheeling, forever spinning, there's no beginning. You know, that it is wheels within wheels within wheels, and there's no way out of the mechanism, because whatever the mechanism is, thinking itself is part of it. And so we have a unique view from the inside out. We can never assume that we can look at it from the outside in. And I think that's an important piece. But I also think that we have to be honest. And that means we have to own the dark places. Now, does that mean critical race theory? I don't even know what that is. But I'll tell you what, I need to know the truth about who Southerners were, especially slaveholders. I need to be able to sort out the pieces of Thomas Jefferson and George Washington that were truly a reach for humankind to a more perfect union and self-governing from those parts that were slave owners and thought less of people of color merely because they were slaves. And those writings are both there, and it hurts. But they both need to be owned if we are going to create a new beginning as a people. And I think we're at an interesting junction in that, and we're going to go forward with that in our next podcast a little bit, and so I don't want to get bogged in that. But I do want us to focus a little on the smaller pieces that are our own lives, and they're not small when you from the inside. How do we begin new pieces? For me, I'd love to find a way to communicate better with my sister, but it'll always be a one-way street. There's certain things that I would like in life to create new in my relationships and understandings, but I've already burnt those bridges, if I can say that. So how do you guys make new in your life? When something crashes, how do you make new?
Well, I think that it's a daily process, and everything that there's the whole idea of when something in your life is not working, or if some understanding, some way of you being in the world is not producing happiness and goodness, and that you are trying to let go of something that you don't want anymore. And I think you're right, so right on about you have to own whatever that is. You have to acknowledge that all of this is part of what we're doing as individuals. We are processing through, in our own way, many of the same themes, many of the same things that you patterns that you talk about, Bob, and all of these wheels within the wheels. I love that analogy, because we're constantly going through these cycles, and hopefully as we leave behind things, and I've had to learn how to live without a lot of things in my life that I really wish were still here. And as we let those things go and accept where we're at right now, I think it opens up a brand new way of understanding that everything is new. I mean, every cell in our body is regenerating. Everything is happening brand new. And yet all of those pieces are still all a part of it, and they are being looked at in new ways as we gain new experiences. And so as we, as a culture, as a country, start to look at our past that you were talking about, Red Hawk, I think we can only start to see it brand new when we can integrate it into our own understanding of what we've experienced in our own lives. And I know that's kind of murky there a little bit, but obviously none of us have lived those experiences, and yet we have lived experiences where we have been oppressed. We've lived experiences where we have been sad. We've lived experiences where we've had to grieve. We've lived experiences that we can touch, that is universal. And it kind of goes back to what you're saying about these universal truths and coming up with a new language and a way to express that and understand what it is that we are all collectively feeling. I mean, when you look at where we're at right now with COVID and with all of the turmoil and the rapid climate change and the things, the disasters that are just coming day after day after day, and how do you begin anew with all of this?
Okay, I want to stop you there because that's a great place to segue our conversation with the amount of time we have left. Bob, you used the metaphor using Jacob, who named Israel, which means to wrestle with God. Marianne, everything you said, we are now at the point where we are Jacob. And it's important to know Jacob was a son of a bitch. The word Jacob literally means grabber, because he was his twin brother who got born seconds before him, and he was holding on to his ankle, and he stole his brother's whole inheritance. So he was at a moral crux within himself and was wrestling with this angel within the context of this. Everything you laid out, Marianne, is welcome to the world right now. We are trying to figure out what actually constitutes health and wholeness. We haven't had a unified perspective of what wholeness is ever in the other than mystics, which had lofty ways of saying it. We now have a whole environmental ecosystem of climate change. We see the interdependence of everything from trade to the way what we breathe. So we're at a clear place of an uncertain future. And that can make us rich or deeply troubled. Go ahead, Bob. I didn't mean to cut you off, Marianne, but I didn't, with the time we have left, I wanted...
No, absolutely. Go for it.
I just wanted to real quickly say, well, what is it that we need to do to start anew? What is it about the way we think, the way we perceive the world around us that will allow us to start something new and not fall into the old patterns? And there's a lot of, I can throw out a lot of terms like get rid of guilt, get rid of shame, get rid of feelings of inadequacy. And that's all easy to say. It's a lot more difficult to do. But there are ways to approach those kind of things, whether you do it on your own, you consult self-help literature, or you consult therapists, or you consult with your friends, or you engage in these discussions like the three of us do. All of these things that we can take the focus off of the feelings that we are locked in to the old ways. We have to figure out ways to break those chains and move toward new ways.
Yeah.
And that's what's going to allow us to move forward.
And to understand the pattern, okay? And the pattern is that we have a story, an understanding of the universe and who we are, and there's things that don't fit, and they become what are called anomalies. And eventually there's enough anomalies where we got a bucket of anomalies we need to reconcile, and a new story emerges. We are now at the point, Einstein had a bucket of anomalies that he recalibrated within a new system, special and general relativity to start with, speed of light, all kinds of things with gravity. We are now at a place, consciousness is, where we have a bucket of anomalies of things that don't fit. And people say, white supremacists say, they're never going to fit, we don't want them to fit, and all that. And, those of us who want to create a new beginning are saying, well, unless we make these part of the fabric of our past and understand that, how can we possibly, in a fair and prudent way, move forward? Go ahead, Marianne.
Well, I was just going to say, I think the realization that we can change is crucial, because sometimes we think, well, this is just the way I am. And I've heard people say that, well, I'm just like this and I'm never going to change. I just can't. to understand, first of all, that you can change if you want to. And I think that's the key right there. And Red Hawk, who the people you were talking about don't want to change. They're very comfortable with who and what they are, and they believe in and so there has to be a desire to change. And in order to want to change, you have to be able to see something different that you want to happen.
And again, you're talking about something that we don't have it written into our story. And that we're seeing that one of the only things that doesn't change is the fact that there's always change. Change is going to happen whether you participate in it or not. So why not rewrite some stuff in your own life to allow you to fit with some new understandings, new ways of seeing things. And to me, I don't, I'm trying to give up belief as a way of life in any way, and to just look at, let's try on this understanding and see what it feels like. Let's try on that understanding and watch what it does to me. Are there pieces that are useful to my life and to a further understanding of what truly constitutes health and wholeness? I think that's...
And you're stepping into that uncertainty place, because when you do that, then you don't know what's going to happen. Whereas getting into your old patterns, sticking with your old patterns, you're pretty sure, even if it's misery, you're pretty sure you know what's going to happen. Yeah. And I think that embracing the uncertainty of change is it's a task, a monumental task.
And we've talked about living in this place is anxiety producing, but the fact is you're going to be anxious and die if you don't move forward, and you'll be anxious and you'll end up dying if you do move forward. But if you move forward, you get to participate in something amazing. And I've talked about the future being an array of waves that are possibilities, and they come to you and you make decisions and choices in your life, and one of those waves collapses into a particle that is your past. The future's waving at us, the past is sitting in us, and we, I want everybody to participate in that. I don't want them to flow down river because of historical inertia, but I want it to be considered and deeply involved human beings making decisions in the name of health and wholeness. And even when you don't make them properly and they constitute conflict and a bunch of other stuff, you go, whoa, that was the wrong way to go. And you change course, and there's the word change again. And I think that's what we're doing. If we have a story that shows that what the algorithm is, your life is an algorithm, evolution is an algorithm. They're all ways to implement change in a direction that is beneficial and healthy for all of us. At least it looks that way to me. We got dead air.
Well, I've got a couple things to say, but I was waiting for you to say what are your last comments, because I think we're getting there. But I think that people may be frightened of change because when we talk about things like you talked about Einstein, finding anomalies and doing all these new theories and stuff. Individual change doesn't have to be big and world-shattering. It can be just the little tiny things. And those little things, they're different for everybody. But once you start making little changes, then you can build on those and make bigger changes. Whether it's, I'm going to try and watch a different newscast tonight than I usually watch. Or I'm going to try reading a magazine that I haven't read before. And just something as small as that can snowball into major changes in your life down the road. Some of the most inspiring things I've seen white supremacists who have realized the error of their ways and then become advocates and gone back and work with some of these militia groups and things like that. And it's really quite inspirational to see that happen. And it can happen in just so many, an infinite number of small ways that can build up to big changes that we all need.
Yeah. And you know, Bob, you point to something that's a source of fear, and that's a lack of predictability. People want their lives to be predictable. It feels safe, it's secure, and you know what we're talking about, and what I really like from Justin Hayward is the uncertain future. There's a point of unfolding that's open to us in a way that is fresh and new if we dare to seize it. And I think that we miss that sometime. And part of this podcast is I don't want our listeners to miss it. I want them to catch it and make new in that brief moment where it comes on them. I think Don Juan used to call it the cubic centimeter of chance, where it's a vortex of high possibility if you dare to act in that moment. And I'll be honest, for me, it was the voiceless choir was that moment when I went, what the hell? I could try this. No one else has done it. We'll see. And that was the voiceless choir was a homeless choir that I created years ago, and we sang for 12 years. It was really fun. It was homeless families, but it was also wrenching. It hurt like hell, and brought a lot of change in my life. Regrettably, people are down on Medicare and a bunch of other stuff until they get old and sick, and then all of a sudden they're for it. So there is ways to, or I should say there are ways to nudge people in the direction of change. And on that note, we are coming now to our final time. When it comes to new beginnings, making new our lives, or something in them. Marianne, what are your final comments here?
I think part of this whole conversation is recognizing the power that we have within ourselves. Number one, to change, and number two, to start anew. And that was one of the tenets of Christianity that I always found so beautiful, was the idea of confession, the idea that you could repent of past deeds and be able to start brand new, clean, brand new. But that's very hard to do when you carry guilt and you have a guilty conscience. And guilt is, and I know I'm going off a little bit, but I think once we can allow ourselves to be able to, number one, forgive, and to move on, to be able to think in new ways. Bob, you had mentioned opening yourself up to other avenues of thought that you may not have opened yourself up to before. If we can just take those small, tiny, incremental steps within our own lives, within ourselves, we are going to change the world, because each one of us carries within us a power that we don't even recognize many times. And those tiny little things have ripple effects. And so when I'm looking at starting new, and I'm doing this continually, I am always trying to start new, because I always want to do the next thing. And the next thing is something I haven't done before. And you're right, it carries uncertainty. It carries there's fear involved. And so how do we step into this brand new year, 2022? I've heard many people say 2022 is going to be a great year. We don't know what kind of a year 2022 is going to be, but we can step into it and say, I am going to be as the best that I can be.
Amen.
In 2022.
Amen. And the word that kept coming to my mind as you were talking was fresh. Don't we all want to eat fresh bread? Fresh perked coffee. We don't want stuff that's old, and I think life is like that. So I should shut up and let Bob do his final comments. Go ahead, Bob.
Well, I'll just kind of repeat what I said before. The changes don't have to be huge to be important in one's life. And if you wait for the big change, you may never make the small ones that would get you to the big change. So use your brain, use your mind, look at your life and think of ways that you can start fresh, even if they're small.
Amen. Amen. And I think that part of the journey that we're on is to wake up, to become more aware at each step. Now, I've been reflecting on the I Ching. You know, it starts with one, and then it becomes two, and then it becomes three, and then it becomes the many, and they gather around the table, and then something happens. They start arguing, and they split, and they each have an army, and they create great conflict, and that's part of the great cycle. Now, what happens though when there's gathering forces that create this conflict is there is another force at work to try to reconcile. And I'm going to suggest in our next podcast that what is happening is we are moving to a point of conflict, and I don't think we're there yet, which is going to inspire, and this is a best case scenario, okay, because we could lose the republic, there's no doubt about that. But I'm, as an optimist, believe we are heading towards a global reformation. A reformation where we redefine and re-understand our nation states within the context of the whole. And through it emerges a whole new understanding of what constitutes health as well as wholeness. So our next podcast, Reformation. My friends, God's peace, God's love, and in all things, may your life become new in the greatest context of all, which is, I cannot say what it is. Blessings.